It comes from the way people think and their value structures. And so with chairs, I was introduced to anatomy and what chair design would be like if it was driven from that anatomical knowledge, what's actually happening to the person that's sitting in a chair and the effect on their performance, their focus, their productivity. Literally, it can start with the chair. Because what do you get? You get a physiology that is in relaxation, which can get you into alpha brain waves, which make you more creative and in flow, and everything follows from there. In our chairs, you can breathe more deeply. The openness of the chest lowers your heart rate by 5 to 8 beats a minute, which is as much as a lot of the drugs. There's so many positive benefits that trauma, fear, scarcity consciousness has to just let go and accept that that's the new reality. It's getting yourself in the right body physiology, the right mental state, so you've got the right brain waves running. That alone could do more to change the world positively than almost anything else.
Welcome to the Care We Need podcast, where we bring together patients and providers to explore how we can improve U.S. health, wellness, and human services systems. This podcast is brought to you by Bennis Companies, where we provide education, consulting, technology, and other resources to help health and wellness professionals streamline their systems and deliver better health outcomes for their clients. With us today is Christopher Zdenek. He's an architect, philosopher, and engineer who founded a company dedicated to applying ergonomic principles as a pivotal lever for positive human evolution and well-being. Christopher joins us today to talk about why ergonomics may be the key to shifting from survival to thriving, whether as individuals, corporations, or societies. Intrigued? You should be. Let's go.
Hi, my name's Christopher Zdenek. I'm one of the founders of Soma Ergonomics, which is a company that specializes in helping people optimize their performance, maintain the highest level of health while they're working. That can be anybody from an individual to an entire corporation. And we take a really unique approach in that we actually followed the latest detailed, clinically proven anatomical medical information that informs both what we teach people when we're consulting with them and what our products look like and how they perform and how they impact the user's performance, which again has a huge impact on a company's bottom line.
So you don't just produce the ergonomic products, you actually teach people about how to best, like ergonomic practices, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because we're systems thinkers, or I'm a systems thinker. I was trained formally as an architect and was lucky I had a photographic memory and a pretty good brain. So it was very easy for me to go from an architecture. It was, wow, I did a good building, but the urban area that it's in is designed like garbage. So I better do urban planning really well. And well, urban planning is like having trouble here because it comes from the way people think and their value structures. So I better become a thought architect working on the value and belief structures of the clients, stakeholders, etc. And so with chairs, I started with a kind of more traditional idea of architects. Many have designed chairs that are famous in museums, etc. But I was introduced to anatomy by a physical therapist from Stanford University that told me everything I never thought about or wanted to know about body mechanics and what chair design would be like if it was driven from that anatomical knowledge place rather than the place that's traditional in the entire industry in the world of like artistic expressions of the use of materials for style and a little back support. But
Yeah.
a really low level of anatomical knowledge of what's actually happening to the user, the person that's sitting in a chair or
Hmm.
in a workstation, and the effect on their performance, their focus, their productivity, etc.
Hmm. This is actually really interesting for me specifically, I think, because I have my bachelor's is in urban planning and sustainable
Mm.
food systems. And my passion that I spent much of my life studying is philosophy and understanding how how people think and then how that drives their life. So it's you and I actually share some key similarities there. And I love what you're saying about essentially designing the upstream process to the downstream effect that you're working for, which is the ergonomics and then the chairs that you design and everything with there. But you understand that there's a system in place that's way before people actually get to the application side of things.
Yeah.
And that, I think your term was thought architect,
Yeah.
or ideas architect, where you actually have to shape the way that people think. You can't just give them new tools.
Yeah. At least help them become aware of their frames of reference and be smart enough in our communication that they are inspired to look deeper, question things, learn something new, etc. Because we learned a long time ago that, and this is really germane to like America and the can do thing and the attitude of, you're only worth the stuff you produce sort of idea mentality. Well, before what you produce is how you think. And if you really look at anybody, doesn't matter if it's Elon Musk or anybody else, General Electric as a corporation or anybody, how they think, the software code they're running, which starts with their worldview, is determining the decisions and the outcomes and how they set up strategy and execute, etc. So they better know that.
As I think, therefore I am, and as I am, therefore I do. And
Yeah.
what you're doing is not just on an individual level. Like this is true of a culture, like the way that a culture processes things.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned with the idea architect, like the way that a culture processes things informs what they build, the systems they build, and then that then reinforces the thought. And it's just this, it's a fascinating interplay between those two things. And I like to think of the way that someone's psyche and their life and their brain wiring and all that is a very similar correlation to a culture and the architecture and infrastructure, the urban planning that happens. There's a very similar correlation. As someone thinks, or as a culture thinks, so they build,
Yeah.
and then that affects how they move forward and what they're able to accomplish or what they're not able to accomplish. So you do that with individuals, with the products that you release and the teaching that you do, and you also do it with teaching corporations and coming in teaching organizations.
I'm getting ready to do that because I'm completing a book that's based on an academic paper I wrote, which was considered a groundbreaking seminal work. I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Fourth Turning.
It rings a
It's
faint
uh,
bell,
it's
but no.
essentially written by a couple professors describing a pattern that the pre-Romans, known as the Etruscans, discovered, 2000 years ago plus, that they saw a 4-generation cycle that repeated throughout time. And every 20 to 25 years, each generation had a particular character and way of thinking. And then they'd switch to the next one and the next one and the next one, and each would have a particular relationship to the other. The name of that book, they call it The Fourth Turning, is because they wanted to highlight to everybody, red flag, warning, warning, pay attention, everybody. The transition between the end of the fourth generation and the beginning of the next cycle, first generation, is generally, if you overlay this pattern on historical events for 2000 years, all of the major wars and economic cataclysms happened then. So we're in for a doozy.
Is that the phrase where it's like strong people produce good time
Yep.
produce weak people produce bad times produce strong people?
Yep, exactly.
Hmm.
That's that you could say is almost the like most concise summary of the pattern and what's going on for people.
The pattern of human history.
And so
So
in my book, I'm describing a more fundamental pattern that's bigger, that again is essential for being able to have the most accurate view of the world, because our minds are constantly cataloging data to figure out, okay, what's real, what's not real, what's important, what's not important.
mhm.
And once you do that and it's accurate enough, things like taking care of your people and having a culture that communicates the value of both the people and the customers is automatic.
Hmm.
You don't go to the place of, I hate customers, just give me the contract and leave me alone.
People mistake how they think for what is.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is like, let's actually drill into, let's make our view of history, our view of the world more accurate intentionally so that we can actually play a more intentional and impactful part in it.
Yeah. If people want to see a little snippet on our somaergo.com website, on the homepage at the bottom of it, there's a logo that says evolve, and there's little graphics of an aborigine sitting on a stump or a squat. He's squatting, no stump at all, just squatting. Then next, they're sitting on a stump, a tribal person, and then a king sitting on a throne, and then a military guy sitting on a desk chair, and then an information age person sitting on a different type of chair. And in there are written major historical events that match the worldview and stage of consciousness that human beings were in at each particular era. And once
Hmm.
you understand that, you're far ahead of how humans have been operating for generations.
We'll get back to that conversation in just a minute. Right now, I want to let you know about two powerful keynote speeches that Tanai Benes is offering. One to help care organizations improve their systems, and one to help empower the people navigating complex illnesses within them. Her first talk, Win the War on Complex Illness, comes straight from the battlefield. As an intelligence officer in the United States Army, Tanai took the worst performing brigade in her area of operations and helped turn it to the best, using a framework she calls the 4 steps to winning a war. Now she brings that framework to health, wellness, and human services organizations so they can improve complex illness outcomes without rebuilding from scratch. Her second talk, Heal or Die, is deeply personal. Tanai spent years battling complex PTSD, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Today, she's thriving as a wife, mother, author, and entrepreneur. In this keynote, she shares lessons that helped her take back her power, reclaim her life, and achieve real results despite disintegrated health, wellness, and human services systems in the United States. This talk is perfect for veteran groups, patient and caregiver associations, elder care groups, and civic organizations. Visit tenaibenes.com/speaker to learn more or to book Tanai for your next event. All right, back to it. It is such a rare thing for someone to understand the story in which they're playing a role. And it is even more rare a thing to have an accurate understanding of the role that you're playing. And I
Yeah.
think even further, to take that role and make it intentional. You understand the story. Now, how do we actually shift the story
Yeah.
through our role? And
Yeah.
so you're doing that through your book, and it sounds like through your work as well. So
Yeah.
help me connect the dots. Help me connect the dots between the ergonomics and this understanding of global history and the evolution of humankind. Like, help me understand where these things fit together.
Sure. I actually decided to do an ergonomic company because I used the pattern recognition awareness of history as a market analysis tool that I can show companies so they make better decisions and don't end up with millions of dollars of plant and equipment for products that are at the end of a life cycle culturally. And the nutshell is the human race goes through the same developmental stages that each of us go through individually, starting with birth and being an infant. And there's 3 super important events that everybody needs to know. One is we don't have a perception of separateness until 3 to 6 months of age, or 3 months to 3 years, 6 months to 3 years of age. At that moment, we go, oh, this is me, and this is blankie, or mommy, or daddy, or bottle. And the critically important thing is that happens in a moment when you're feeling joyful, happy, safe. That's the imprint you are giving the other in your neural net. And it's one of the very first, most fundamental, it's like firmware code in your computer that you're setting up. And if it happens in a moment when you're terrorized, afraid, unsafe feeling, you're imprinting with all that cortisol and adrenaline that into your neural net. And so, kind of helpful to know what worldview did you install or get installed in you at that moment? Because it determines largely, do you live from a scarcity consciousness for the rest of your life or more of an abundance consciousness and those sort of things? The second big thing is between the age of 7 and 11, the human organism changes from primarily feeling the world through the kinesthetic sense. We feel everything. You feel the energy of people, that type of thing, to cognitive and visual dominance. And out of that arises the linear binary logical brain and the scientific method and the desire to do the, breaking apart of things to understand them, etc. Great tool, really useful, but you lose the kinesthetic sense, especially if, as a human organism, you've been traumatized and you had to modulate that to reduce the signal of emotional energy to a safe level to survive, basically. So then the third big thing that happens to us human organisms, our frontal lobes finish growing out. For women between 21, 22, men as late as 25 years of age. That is what actually makes us human. So one of the things I say is this is the first time the human race is predominantly going to be human. Up to now, we're primarily just smart monkeys driven by emotion. And any good marketing person knows, oh yeah, we make sales and we drive people by hitting their emotions. So that executive function that is allowed to develop once the frontal lobes grow out lets you develop the most important thing. Some people say it's more important than IQ or EQ, and that's metacognition, the ability to have a third party independent observer watching yourself and your internal processes of thought and feeling and action, and then be able to, in a detached way, notice and understand all the thoughts and actions of others. So rather than identification and attachment that elicits most often defense responses, you're coming from a place of, that's interesting. And you can actually then really have the capacity to do intelligent strategy because you're like in a helicopter looking at all the parts and pieces and go, oh, that fits into there, that fits into there. We can move that over there, that'll go over here really well. That'll facilitate this, et cetera, et cetera. So in general, executive teams that have people that are most in this high level of development have a higher ROI than executive teams that have people that are in the lower stages of development. And this has actually been studied and proven. That could be another conversation later. But it's pretty fascinating stuff.
I absolutely love this. This is something you and I could talk about off screen just for hours and hours, and I would love it because this is a personal passion of mine to understand as well. Because it's something that especially I began to see when I had our daughter, and just begin to understand like how I need to parent her is very much correlated to her stage of development, which I can understand as human history developing. Like, you can watch the stages unfold, and my job as a parent is to like help her navigate those stages successfully till she gets to the point where we are in the 21st century, essentially.
Yeah.
But I love that, and what you're doing with your book and with helping these teams. It sounds like is your goal to kind of affect the hiring process so that executives hire other people who are further along in their process, or is it more to like understand where am I at so that I can act more strategically?
Both. They're both important. So in a corporate setting, it's setting up an awareness of all this for one, and that in turn affects the culture of the company, which then sets up all kinds of positive things, like I said, for increased performance. One of the things that is so important after you've developed this frontal lobe and it's grown out and you're developing this third party independent observer, it's very important that people understand. Just because I said that and they heard that and they go, okay, I understand. No, it's like you just went to the gym and somebody showed you weights. Your biceps aren't big yet. You've got to go to the gym religiously and do the exercises in the right form to get the result. Similarly, to develop the really effective third party independent observer, so you can do more detached, objective analysis of yourself and others in the marketplace. That's where the real power comes in. You can kind of, wing it, which is what most people do. And they just kind of like, okay, my gut says this, do it. And, the human sensory apparatus is pretty accurate because it's designed to survive for millions of years. But this is more accurate. And so once you get to that third big event, the most important thing is that you then kind of have almost like an out of body experience and you look at, become aware of, and reintegrate your previous developmental stages. Remember, I said at 7 to 11, you kind of lose the kinesthetic feeling sense and you get dominated by the cognitive and the visual. Super essential to reintegrate that feeling sense because then it's like you have spidey senses using a popular cultural terminology. That feeling sense is actually in many ways faster than the cognitive.
And are you talking about like a physical being able to sense your environment, or are you talking more of like having an intuitive sense of what's going on in the situation?
Both. You have to feel the environment, and that feeds the intuition and generates the intuition. If you're cut off from that feeling sense, the mind is pretty much in control, and you're just thinking, processing, analyzing with your brain. And there's a popular book, The Prince by Machiavelli. There's a stunning quote in there about how people are easily dupable because they go by what they see rather than feel.
Hmm.
That's how important this is.
They're paying attention to only what's presented to them
Right.
rather than everything else that's going on in a situation that maybe their eyes can't pick up on, but their senses, their intuition, everything, the kinesthetic senses that you're talking about
Yeah.
can pick up on, but they have to be in a position to actually sense that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
It's
love that. I
very,
love that for so many reasons. One, like, I just want to briefly touch on the what you mentioned. I love that you mentioned religiously. I love that you use that as your word because I feel like that's actually one of the main, as a purely humanistic view of history, that's one of the main benefits of different religions over the world. And I'm not commenting on which one's right or wrong or whatever. That's not my point. But
yeah.
the the disciplinary, and I don't mean that in punishment. I mean that in
Yeah.
the training aspect that they have played in cultures to essentially push evolution forward, push the development of human consciousness forward.
Yeah.
I love that you use going to the gym religiously, because those things are just perfect in this conversation of human history. But what we were talking about also, people look at Machiavelli and kind of, I think that they associate him with this like very negative, cold,
Yeah.
kind of malicious
Yeah.
approach to the world. But really, it's much more about what you're talking about, which is, how do I have this almost detached analysis of the way things are, not the way I want them to be, but the way
Yeah.
things are? And then how do I play a real impactful role in that system?
Yeah.
And what you're doing is essentially helping someone understand the current system and
Yeah.
the system in which they're operating and how they play a role in that. There is a model that I developed a little while back about, that I would love to share with you and get your thoughts on, because it sounds like it goes right along with what you're doing. A model of essentially optimum human performance, which is understanding the relationship between the body, the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and what I would call the spirit. Some people might call higher self or intuition or whatever, but it sounds like basically the body is the thing with which you interact with the world. There's the physical part. It has the senses, it has the wiring, it has all these things. And the mind is, the way that I was brought up, the mind is like doing everything. I have to think about everything. I have to do everything with my conscious mind. I have to be able to reason everything perfectly out and all this stuff. What was happening is it was very slow, very
It-
suboptimal. And the conscious mind is very good at communicating and observing certain things, like taking in and putting out information, but it's not good at processing the massive amount of data that's going on in a
Yeah,
situation.
exactly.
That is what the subconscious is for. The subconscious is way bigger than the
Yeah,
conscious mind, I should say.
yeah,
And so the idea of like letting your subconscious do the work and letting your intuition essentially be the CEO, like drive the train,
yeah,
let your subconscious be the one that's processing all the data and just focus your frontal lobe, your conscious mind on being present in the moment. I'm here only to observe and communicate. That's it. Let the rest of me do their job. And that has allowed me to operate at much more efficiently in so many different situations. But I love what you're depicting because it sounds like it's very similar. We have some similar thoughts on that, and I would love to get your like how are you presenting this to people who perhaps have never seen this before, never been introduced to the idea that they need to trust their senses for lack of a better place to start.
sure. A couple of stories. One would be um, a senior executive vice president, favorite of the CEO. She's walking down the hallway one day and the coffee cup dropped right out of her hand. She'd lost her grip strength. She had been ignoring her body, as is typical of high performers, especially intellectual cognitive high performance. So, fortunately, she met this medical group that I ended up working with that used biofeedback, which is an excellent tool for human beings to get the connection strengthened between their brain and their body. So they put surface electromyography sensors on the trapezius muscles, for example, and then a person could see and cognitively understand the signals on the screen, which were showing the electrical output of the muscles. 2 microvolts or less is a relaxed muscle, which allows for optimized blood flow. 20, 100, whatever other high levels, you're crunching the muscles, expending energy for no good reason, unless you're in the middle of a punch or lifting a weight, and you're cutting off blood flow, which prevents the flushing of toxins and the flow in of nutrients, starting the cascade of inflammation. And that can be anywhere in your body that you're doing that. Your vital organs, your hands, which manifests in repetitive strain injuries. And what you talked about wanting to help people learn how to prevent chronic disease development, this is kind of where it starts from because the body's giving signals all the time. And the tragic thing is we mostly ignore them because, you know, we're mostly focused on immediate survival, walking down the pathway, possible snake, jump, not a variety of other ways of looking at things. So cancers and other things. Oh, you could have noticed there was tension in your body. You were holding resentment and anger. That was causing cortisol, changing the pH balance in your body, and resulting in weak immune system and the development of or hosting of parasites and tumors. And that was going on for a long time, but you weren't paying attention. And it was all there all the time. And so using this biofeedback equipment, the person is able to feel it's like, "Oh, wow, that's my muscles relaxed. Oh, that's tense." And I remember when I got hooked up to it, I was like, "Wow, this is the weirdest thing ever. I feel like a Raggedy Andy doll." It's like, "Oh, I'm gonna let go of my body. This is not the, stand up military posture, be ready for action sort of posture that I was raised with." If you're sitting and typing on a computer or assembling or doing any sort of task with your hands, you could even be sitting in a meeting. If you don't understand and have an awareness that you're holding a bunch of muscle tension in different parts of your body, you're compromising yourself all kinds of ways. And like I said, I had no idea. And how interesting this was, I got the shoulder tension out of my shoulders. I learned how to mouse and keyboard and pick up the phone and drive a car, do the dishes, etc., without putting tension in my shoulders. What was hysterically funny was a week later, the doctor calls me and says, "Hey, how's your shoulders doing?" I'm like, Great. You know, it's really weird though. My jaw's killing me. My brain had not figured out how to process stress that had previously been held in my shoulders. So it moved it around. It's like a game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that you know that it's not purely physical, as in it's not like a physical injury necessarily, is when it keeps coming up even when the actual physical area has been addressed.
Yeah. Yeah. So thoughts, values, and beliefs in our subconscious determine the meaning we put on something and the resulting feeling and emotion that comes out of us.
Yes. Our thoughts and our beliefs cascade into thoughts and our beliefs become associations, become biochemical reactions in our body whenever we experience something. And especially in the case of trauma, where you're essentially, it's kind of a memory disorder where you are stuck in that moment, or at least part of your brain is stuck in that moment, which means
Yep.
some part of you is always experiencing
Yep.
that moment. And so some part of your body is constantly reacting as if you're in an amount of danger.
Yeah, which
So
is the
this is,
classical type A, type B personalities that,
mhm,
corporations have kind of studied for a long time. And generally type Bs had more CEO positions than type As ever did as a
hmm,
rule. If you look at the numbers and the math and the statistics.
hmm,
Yeah.
hmm. I hadn't heard that. And I think I'd heard others that kind of work with that. For example, Robert Kiyosaki talks about A students work for A students work for C students, and B students work for the government. But it's that same kind of idea of type A people. They work very well in a certain direction, but type B, as you put it, they have a lot more. I would summarize in the flexibility and the creative thinking that's required to be in a CEO type position. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, as a result of having, you could say, a lower level of lifetime trauma experience, they don't feel as threatened.
Hmm.
So that results in a more open mind, which is more capable of allowing a variety of inputs to come in or a variety of situations to be experienced without a bunch of defense mechanisms arising automatically. They
It's
can go,
interesting.
huh, yeah, what do we do with that? Instead of, oh my God, it's an emergency.
And the flexibility, what you're talking about there, I think is a really important part. The idea of, if you're a type A person, you probably have been through a lot of trauma. And that's
Yeah,
something that I hearing you say, and I actually very much agree with in principle, but it's definitely not something that you hear very much of. And it's something I think that it's a self-awareness thing of like, hey, if you are known, if as a type A person, if you know yourself, that's probably a clue to look into your past, because like you said, there are actual downstream results of not having processed that trauma, is
yeah,
that you become a much more rigid thinker and you become someone who cannot adapt to the things that someone in an executive position needs to be able to adapt to.
yep. What?
Hmm,
Yeah,
I love
it
it.
totally will cap your career ascent, cap your success and level of reward you feel in a relationship of any type.
So let me
Because
just say this for anyone who is unclear: unresolved trauma will cap your career. So you took this and you went to ergonomics. It sounds, and I'm understanding the picture a lot more clearly now, where you understood the mind body connection and the feedback that happens, and you started designing systems essentially to support a better feedback loop.
yeah, because one of the things that biofeedback therapist discovered over the years, and actually Tony Robbins talks about this regularly, physiological state more effectively and quickly changes mental state than the other way around. You can't meditate and think yourself into as much of a changed, positive, functional mental state physiology just using your mind as you can if you move your body. That's why he has people jump up and down and move their bodies in a certain way because, they've started to do studies now which are really useful that your body will produce more testosterone, which gives you an overall higher level of well-being and capability, confidence, etc. just because you're doing this. You know, they say do this for 2 minutes before any interview, for example, or sales presentation, stuff like that. And similarly, sitting in a chair, if you're sitting in a chair that's slightly larger and you're able to sit in a confident position, your legs are a little open, you're kicked back, you might even be doing this. Your body at that moment is starting to produce more testosterone than if you're sitting there like this, hunched over, typing at your computer, breathing shallow, etc.
And then that affects your thought life. This is something I've was just recently talking to my wife about, that my own experience, I've been becoming more aware of where I am in the middle of the day and how it affects my thoughts. Like, for example, I'm much more of a morning person in that I get more done in the morning. I'm focused, all this stuff. But I'm also, what I've been noticing is that I'm excited about what I'm doing. I think it's going to do well. I'm passionate about the stuff that I'm building, all of that. And then 2 o'clock rolls around, 2 p.m. rolls around.
Yeah.
And then I find myself having thoughts of like, was that even worth it? Like, did that even, those things even, the stuff that I built this morning, I mean, that's not really even going to work
Yeah.
probably. But like, I've started noticing this. And so I intentionally like, okay, I'm not going to make any changes until tomorrow morning,
Yep.
because I know right now I'm in a compromised state
Yep.
right now, and I cannot think clearly about this. And it's not so much my thoughts, it's like my beliefs about it. Everything shifts depending
And
on,
it's
I
driven by,
think, the biochemical level of our body.
yeah, it's driven by your overall physiological state, biochemically, hormonally, brainwave, energetically, etc.
So that goes into like, how are you standing or sitting while you're at work? If you're in meetings,
Yeah.
as a C-suite executives out there, or just leaders, project managers, are that, if you're sitting like this all day long and
Yep.
then have to go into a meeting where you're supposed to inspire your people
Yep.
and get them going in the right direction, your body is literally preventing you from doing that because of how you are using it.
Yeah. One really great tip to enhance your performance at a company, for example, always stand up when you're going to do a presentation or do a pitch, because you'll get an increase of about, forget if it was 10 or 20% of blood flow to your brain. So you're going to be ahead of everybody else that's sitting down listening and able to think faster, respond faster, be more cogent, etc., just by doing that.
So
So
you
in
are
terms of
designing, go
working
ahead.
all day, we started using what are called sit stand height adjustable tables back in like 1997 when nobody cared. And we found pretty quickly that what was most positive for maintaining peak levels of energy, focus, productivity was to cycle through 3 postures over and over again. The mental model is, okay, I've got to sit straight, be at 90 degrees, type, do that. Bad model. You could do that for a little while. If you're tuned into your body, about 15, 20 minutes, you start noticing your lower back is feeling a little tight, your shoulders are feeling a little rounded forward. Sit back, recline in a backrest that's narrow enough to allow your shoulder blades to be free and your whole chest area to be open. Gravity is now your friend. You can reduce the pressure on your vertebra as much as 85%. So if you've had
So
a
that's,
sciatica issue, that could get resolved by doing that. And energetically, or just, feeling wise, when you're working, you just feel like you suddenly reset yourself. You can go another 20 minutes at kind of peak focus level. You're now typing more on your lap. You maybe moved your monitor close to you. Your monitor ideally should be on a monitor arm that has good extension length so that you can push it back when you're sitting upright, pull it to you when you're reclined. And then after 20 minutes or so of reclined, you might start feeling sleepy because, you're reclined. It's kind of a kickback sort of posture. You go, okay, I got to get up. So for me, I can do that. I've got a height adjustable table and I'm going to stand here. It's going to mess up my view here, but suddenly I get reinvigorated. I can go another 20 minutes, work, stay in peak performance, focus, get the report done, whatever it is, do more phone calls. But after
and
about
so
20
it's,
minutes, your feet are going to start feeling a little funny, depending on how well you're taking care of yourself nutritionally. sugar, blood, salt balance, etc., electrolytes. You might start having inflammation in your calves and lower legs, and you're just gonna get like, oh, gravity's getting me down. I need to sit and relax. Yeah, so start over. Sit upright. Do that for 20 minutes, and you cycle through that. You'd be way better off all day.
So you are totally revamping my like how I viewed my entire corporate career because I was constantly in that cycle. I just thought I was failing. I do deal with sciatica, which I think is at least partly psychosomatic, and some dealing with that myself in other areas. But I, I did have that mental model in my head of like, this is how I should be doing this. And
Yeah.
if it's hurting, it's because I'm not doing it well enough. Like, and so I need to do it even harder. And then I like, fine, I can't do this anymore. And I would stand up or I would give up and lean back. And I do what you're saying is intentionally do that, cycle through those things
Yeah.
and use it to improve your body. Like this is actually a good thing that you want to
100%.
do that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. You want to keep your body in motion and you're balancing. One of the things that I try to teach people is how to live from paradox or resolving paradox, meaning resolving seeming opposites. Like you want to have support and your muscles want to totally relax and let go, but your joints and musculoskeletal system and your cardiovascular want to move. So how do you stay still and not move and move? And you got to mix them up. Then you get more
That
optimum health and you do what, a lot of the performance people in corporations and sports talk about. You can more easily get in and maintain a flow state.
that is fascinating. For one thing, that's something that I've actually come to believe as one of the markers of maturity. And I don't mean maturity in any kind of judgmental or non way. I mean, like, literally, how developed is your conscious and subconscious mind is essentially the ability to handle paradox, the
Yeah,
ability to handle two truths at once that seem contradictory. And like, you
yeah,
can, from a psychological perspective or from a cultural, sociological perspective, you can kind of pinpoint where someone is, or at least not, maybe not pinpoint, but you can tell generally where someone is in their maturity by how comfortable they are with two opposing truths. And what you're saying is this is not just a mind thing, it's a body thing. And that's the thing, again, going back to that whole model of like optimum performance, is that your frontal lobe hates paradox. It
yeah,
wants things to have one way, make sense. This is supposed to be. And there's a sense of kind of like, let's relax. It's okay that there's more going on in the situation than my frontal lobe can codify. Like
yeah. And
there's
I'd
other
say
things
it
that
might be more your amygdala that wants that.
okay.
And if you develop the frontal lobe well enough, that third party independent observer is
Hmm.
happy to be open and see everything like they're watching the Cirque du Soleil
Hmm.
and they're not needing any acrobat to sit down.
I love that, and this is a huge part for me as well because I actually have dealt with some ASD, autism spectrum disorder, for been aware of it for a little while now, and that's been one of the big parts of my own journey is learning. I spent the first couple decades of my life trying to find the answer, trying to find the truth, trying to find. I think part of that goes back again to the trauma in youth and all that stuff because one of the core experiences of someone who's dealing with ASD or probably any kind of neurodivergence is that they constantly get the feedback that they're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
And so no matter how, every time I try to interact with people, I would get the feedback, you're doing it wrong.
yeah,
Like, no, that's weird. So I came to the conclusion that there was some right way out there that I needed to go find. And this informed my approach to religious studies. This informed my approach to philosophy and informed my approach to how I dealt with people.
yeah,
I was definitely that person who was like, there is one right way and I will do that one right way. And if you don't agree with that one right way, then you're wrong or prove me wrong.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it was definitely affected my relationships, but it wasn't until much later in life that experience forced me into situations where there was no one right answer. And I had to come to grips with that or break. And that
Yeah.
was my option.
Yeah.
And it was a really profound experience for me. For me, it was spiritually derived of my understanding of my higher power and like the things that we were going through. And it was like, how, like, I know that my higher power is good, but our life sucks right now.
Right.
And I don't understand how those two things go together.
Yeah.
Like, cause I'm not like, I had this understanding that life sucked for people who did it wrong.
Right. Right. Right.
And I needed to do it right. And then my life wouldn't suck.
Uh-huh.
And to everything that I was doing to the best of my ability, the best of my knowledge, I was killing myself to do the right thing.
Sure.
And my life sucked.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, why is this? I know my higher power is good, but this is happening. And it was this like, I was walking in nature at this one moment, and it was like something that my mind could assent to. You'd say my amygdala, or like my subconscious, whichever the right one is it couldn't grasp, it couldn't accept that until that one moment. It was like, it's not either or, it's both and. My higher power is good,
Yeah.
and things suck right now. And they have no relation to each other. At least that's the way that I understood it at the time. And I needed to be able to accept both. And for me, it was like two brain circuits that had never spoken
Yep.
finally touched.
Yeah.
And it was like in that moment I reached a level of like you talked about, the objective observer, the ability to see your own situation from a third perspective is like, wow. I don't know how this doesn't sound profound to say it, but for me, this is life changing.
Oh, it is to most people. Yeah. It's just we assume because we hear about things that we're doing it, but it's a unique experience that is almost like an ultimate superpower in a way. 'Cause like I said, you integrate all the previous stages, you got your spidey senses going, and you've got a third party independent observer, so you're able to consider all the inputs without collapsing into a decision immediately or a reaction. You can be in a flow state and optimize by very consciously picking the best pieces of information, which previously was not possible.
And there's a resource I want to bring up for people who are listening to us right now and are like, okay, I have these, I understand I need to do these stages, but I don't even know what the stages are. And I want to, it is written from a Christian perspective, but I believe there's certain parts of it that are so powerful in this topic that anyone can benefit from it. And it's called Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You. It's a book. And again, like I said, it's written from a Christian perspective, but there is a model in there of essentially what these stages are,
Nice.
and what a person needs to learn in each one of these stages.
Yeah.
And someone who skips a stage, it's not like they magically learned that. They need to
Right.
go back and learn that so that they can continue on their journey. And there's another book, again written from a somewhat a religious background, but it's called Fathered by God by John Eldridge. And this one specifically is for the men and the male audience, but it talks about those stages and like the the driving passion and the what success means in each of the stages of life for someone. And like
Yes.
what it means when you're a boy is very different than what it means when you're a husband, or what it means when you are the leader of a company, or what it
Yeah.
means when you retire and become what he calls a sage. Like there's a
Yep.
very different stages, and they cannot, and you have to work your way through them in order to have the level of excellence, the level of impact, the level of fulfillment that you want in life.
Yep.
Are there any good resources that you've used, that you've heard, that you've experienced, in helping people understand and work through these stages?
Yeah. There's a couple of excellent ones. One is an organization called Stages International, and they have studied for a few decades now the characteristics that are in each developmental stage. And there's a beautiful summary that I have that gives a succinct description of this is your strength and weakness when you're in this developmental stage. This is your strength and weakness in this developmental stage. This is it over here and over here. And their model has 7 stages split in halves: 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 7. Anyway, you understand and see that like I have 3 giant charts that show the human story for the last 40,000 years. And you can see how everything, a term from fractal theory, is self-similar. Means everything matches in character or flavor or scent. Like, everything is blue water or everything is green water or everything is washed in red water, right? And if you're in that stage, you can't escape it. It's all going to be red, right? Tinges of red everywhere. And that is very much what's going on when any of us is in any of these developmental stages. We got that worldview that's generated by that developmental stage, that type of consciousness, and we apply that to everything we see. If we don't understand that, you can be a corporation, an individual, and completely, I don't understand why, like, most people would agree that whatever it is, finance, healthcare, education, agriculture, food, they've all been dominant industries that have been in greater and greater increasing crises. There's a reason for that, and it's entirely developmental. And I explain that in my book and the trainings that I give people.
Mhm.
And so another part of this third party independent observer, great, you got that skill, you can consider lots of different things going on, kind of hold paradox. The other really important thing is being aware of your environment. And so that could be your workstation, the lighting you have, the sound quality, the air quality, oxygen level, chair that I'm using, desk setup, etc. It can also be just your whole environment. And are you trying to run in mud or are you trying to run on a track with cleats? You can be super aware and super developmentally advanced, but if you haven't bothered to notice that you're in a culture, a company, a society that's basically running mud, there's only so fast you're going to go and you're going to get dirty doing it.
And that
And this is one of the things I show people is we're actually living through the biggest transition in human history. Aside from the first time we're going to become human, this is the moment when all previous cultures reached their peak of empire and then failed. So, kind of an important piece of information to know. I laugh because,
and
you
with that comes it's the first time that every culture in the world can interact at the
yeah,
same time in the same place on the internet. And
yeah,
what you mentioned that with that awareness, with the need for awareness also comes the need for boundaries and the
yep,
need for where do I fit in the system? What is going on? What do I have responsibility for? What do I not?
yep,
Because we as a people, we evolved culturally, psychologically, we evolved more for a village mindset. And when you when your neighbor is in trouble, there's danger to you in a
yep,
village.
yep,
Now we're living in a world where everyone can know everything bad going on everywhere in the world all at once. Our wiring is not prepared for that. And that
no,
doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it does mean you need to be aware. Just because you know there's a something horrible going on the other side of the world, like you need to be aware of the impact that has on your system because one, bad news sells. There's a reason for that. It's because, like you mentioned earlier, our brains are programmed to survive, not
yeah,
necessarily to be well, to survive. And
yep,
survival prioritizes bad information, bad news. And so bad news sells. Marketing can sometimes focus on like let's sell the bigger, worse mouse. That's sort of they sell the worst danger, all of that. And then the access to information that we have, like be aware of where you are in this world and understand there are things that I do not have the power to change, and therefore I need to let go and let someone else who does have the power to change them. And I need to focus on my lane. And that's not something that comes naturally to us because we evolved for a village mindset.
yeah,
And now the world has become a village.
yeah, yeah. One really big detail there is how trauma functions in human beings. is that in general, people who are really badly traumatized develop sociopathic, narcissistic personality styles, which I call maladaptive survival strategies. They also then lose empathy. So it's very easy for that type of a person running that program to use others and not care what expense it is to the other person so that they can get ahead. In a tribe, you couldn't really do that because, that understanding if there's less than 23 people, your tribe is going to die. You're
Mhm.
all done.
That's why capital punishment existed.
And yeah, old tribes, they used to excommunicate somebody that was really off. And whether it's the Norse tales and the god of Loki, the crazy guy, the trickster, we have to be aware of that tendency due to trauma and come up with a good way to work with it. Because one of the really important things everybody needs to know is the more wildly successful something is, the more quickly it will attract the dark triad, sociopath, narcissist, Machiavellian type of personality. So you might be in a great place and there's a lot of oxygen and light and everything's cool. And then what happened? It was, beautiful Christianity and now it's part of Rome. And it's like oppressive. What happened? Yeah. The smart people that want power and control, which all people who have traumatized are driven for, took it over. They've co-opted the energy, they've co-opted all of the positive things about it because they had the smarts, they're high functioning, so they
Mhm.
recognize, "Oh, these are all good things, we're gonna use them to maintain or continue our empire, our power structure, our whatever you wanna call it." Yeah. There's a really great book called The Master and His Emissary, and that is I think it's an Oxford professor, and he's describing the right brain and the left brain. The master is the right brain, the emissary is like the COO is the left brain. And don't mix those up, which is unfortunately what we've been mostly doing in the modern world. So once we fix that, we'll be doing a lot better. We can get in
'Cause
those
that
flow states. We can resolve paradox, work together, not be combative, not be driven by scarcity consciousness as much or at all, which
yeah,
allows us to be way more creative and in abundance thinking.
'cause that's what trauma does. And whether it drives you to become a perennial victim or a perennial abuser, it comes from trauma, and trauma locks you into a certain way of being, certain way of mindset. And this is true of individuals, it's true of
Yep.
communities, it's true of nations,
Yep.
that trauma locks you into a certain way of thinking, one way or another. But we need to be able to understand where we are in that system, understand this is how it's affecting us, so that
Yeah.
we can make the strategic moves to just unlock unbounded creativity and potential.
Yep.
And that's what you're doing with your work in
Yeah, because
ergonomics. That's what you're
literally it can
doing.
start with a chair. In ergonomics, we actually make the joke of, "Oh, yeah, everything starts with the chair." If you're gonna do an ergonomic evaluation, try to improve things, start by making sure the chair is right for the person. It matches their body size and weight, their work style, what they do, how they do it, for how long, how short, and any particular genetic accident, injury, discomfort issues that they have. You gotta cover those 3 bases. Because what do you get? You get a physiology that is in relaxation, which can open, which can get you into alpha brain waves, which make you more creative and in flow. And everything follows from there in terms of being able to be more open, to not be trauma induced. And that's why we start, like I said, with the body and a chair. Because in our chairs, you can breathe more deeply. Actually, the openness of the chest lowers your heart rate by 5 to 8 beats a minute, which is as much as a lot of the drugs. Lowers your cortisol rate, gets more blood to your brain. There's so many positive benefits. It's kind of stupid. But that's one of the reasons I do these podcasts. I've been remiss in sharing this with a wider audience around the world, and I'm correcting that at this time.
Man, this is awesome. I, like I said earlier, we could do a series together on these topics because it's amazing to find someone who has that perspective. The understanding, the philosopher's heart and the engineer's mind is one way to say that. And the understanding
Yeah.
this is what's going on in human history, and here's the mechanisms at play, and here's how you can actually begin to change it. I would love it. I want to take that opportunity and let's talk about. We've been talking about the history of
Yeah.
humanity for this entire time. Let's put our brains together and dream a little bit about what the future looks like. If people took this mindset, this methodology, it starts with the chair and it starts with this third party perspective and all of this and being able to do that. Like, let's say everyone was able to adopt that today. What would
Yeah.
10 years from now look like?
You heard of a guy named Peter Diamandis,
No.
X Prize? I forget. It's like a Abundance 360 might be his organization. I forget. But if you listen to him talk, he's got to be one of the most optimistic, abundance oriented people you will ever hear in your entire life. And he's a mover and shaker, knows all the billionaire, millionaire guys. And so basically, what he's saying, if you look at what's currently available in terms of new methods for food production, overall material production, health and well being, etc., we're going to have basically the best world we've ever had. That trauma, fear, scarcity consciousness has to just let go and accept that that's the new reality that it can be a part of and is coming if we just do that. So it's getting yourself in the right body physiology, getting yourself in the right mental state. So you've got the right brain waves running. And yeah, it all works fantastic. One of the key things that helps people a lot, and this can be very hard for people to understand, especially because of the cultural soup we've been swimming in, is understand that all perceptions of separateness are misperceptions. And that came from that initial illusion of or experience of separateness from 6 months to 3 years of age. It was occurring, especially in a traumatized way. And what's really great development, I think it was Denmark just this last week, officially changed its child rearing guidance to never let a child cry it out. Sleep with your child. In that tribal, early human development, we're close together, you feel safe, you feel connected. There is no other. You are one sort of organism, way of existence. That alone could do more to change the world positively than almost anything else. Because once you're set up for that antagonism of other, literally picture in your mind everybody standing in their own turret in a castle and everybody shooting their bow and arrow at everybody else. There's no alignment. Everybody's got their own little closed off perception of separateness with their own individually developed ideas of what their perfect life is and their goals are. And they could just as easily match 98% of the ways you could think of, because guess what? We all need clean water, clean air, clean food, hugs and kisses. It's not that hard, people. But in that obsession with the fear of scarcity and separateness and putting ourselves first before thinking of the whole, it's like the most backward way of doing things in the world. It's counterintuitive from the adolescent perspective, which is take care of yourself, it's all about me. But like you said, if you're in a tribe, you get it. You better take care of all the other people in the tribe because all of you are dependent on each other for your survival. So that was what we can move to as a global culture between all nations, all companies, all individuals. It's a letdown for the people who are really trapped in the struggle for amassing the most power possible and building the biggest empire. They're stuck in adolescent stage of proving themselves and measuring up to their toxic father or mother's standards. They've got to have more or whatever that is, and they can't trust anybody. And they've got to lie, cheat, and steal to get what they need and want. But you start clearing that stuff out, it's the best time ever. But it's hard to get people to switch because we're creatures of habit. And a great term is metabolic efficiency. That is our true enemy. Everybody from the amoeba on up tries to conserve energy. You do that by doing what you've done before, what's already laid out in your neural nets and your patterns of thought and behavior.
And what you mentioned just a moment ago about basically it underlines the core reason why I and my wife started Bennis Companies, which is that we already have everything that we need to have everyone on planet Earth live well. But what holds us back are the things like trauma and chronic
Yeah,
illness, the things that lock a person or a culture into a
yeah,
certain way of thinking, a certain way of being. And it precludes their ability to be flexible and adapt to new stages of maturity. And as long as people are not being healed, they won't progress. And that is
yeah.
why we started Bennis Companies. And
Nice.
I love that. I love what you're doing. And I think we've just come full circle a little bit right here, because what we've done is we've talked about, these are the two things that people need. We need the mindset and the infrastructure. We need the mind and the body to
Yeah,
be able to adapt to this new way. Like, those are the two things that hold us back that you just mentioned, with the mindset and the physicality in the body that you're doing with ergonomics, and what you're doing with coaching, what you're doing with your book, all of that. You're addressing those two things. And it's like, these two things are what hold us back, and these two things are what needs to be healed and fixed, corrected in this era in order to move to the next point. I would
yeah,
love, I would absolutely just right now love to invite you on again, so you and I can talk about what that transition looks like, because what is needed versus someone's capacity to do what is needed requires some transition. And that is something I
yeah.
think you and I would love to have a conversation with you about that, and really kind of
Yeah,
dig
a
into
smart
that.
guy named Buckminster Fuller once said that if you want to get people to change, you have to provide them the detailed vision of where they're going to go or where you want to take
Hmm.
them. Otherwise, they ain't going to go forward because
Yeah.
they've got the metabolic efficiency habits of what they've been doing, and letting go of that to go somewhere else, hardest thing in the world. So yeah, that's one of the
So
things I write about is what's been failing and what's replacing it and why, based on the understanding of these developmental stages and how our worldviews change. Because we can be John Wayne, super Delta Force, Navy SEAL, whatever, in our capability, right? But that doesn't prevent the structural issues. It's not that any of us are sitting here in victim consciousness to say, oh, that's why my life sucks. But it's important to recognize that there's certain structural things in place that prevent anybody from going from level 1 to level 2 or level 5 to level 10. And our scarcity consciousness, 10,000 years of history, mindsets, mental models are currently preventing the entire human race from being able to level up to a fantastically better world and life. And yeah, there's lots of positive ways to do that. We can talk all about that. And that's what I
I
train people in the workshops I do. Because, like I said, they can listen to this podcast. They can cognitively understand this. They can look at my charts and go, oh, yeah, we're switching from here to here. This is the transition, the development of the ego and the self, and the correction of the map. But how do you live from that so that it's like I said, you're at the gym and you're actually doing the reps every other day to build those muscles. That's what we're all going to do as a team human.
I love it. Well, Chris, this has been one of my favorite conversations I've had on this podcast, and I absolutely love it. It's my passion. And the wisdom that you bring, the insight about human history and how you apply that to modern day individual, practical, everyday living is amazing. And so thank you so much for what you're doing, because it's playing a part of a bigger picture. And I love that. And thank you for what you're doing on the practical. And also thank you for coming on today. It's been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. And there'll be links on the podcast to our website, to my LinkedIn profile. I will have a website that'll be related to my book, Where Do We Go From Here.tv. This will be kind of a channel where I'm sharing other things regularly. But for now, yeah, somaergo.com. There's email in there, or chris@somaergo.com. People can reach me there. Or like I said, reach out to me on Facebook, Chris Zdenek, or LinkedIn. And I'm happy to help people wherever they're at. And it could be, like I said, a corporation that found themselves making a bad strategic decision and they don't know why, to a company that wants to reduce their workers' comp claim costs from $3 million a year to $1 million a year and have an 820% return on investment, which is something we've actually literally done for people. Or understanding all of this thought process stuff that's so essential to moving forward and having the best cultures possible within ourselves, in our companies, and in the world.
To become a cultural engineer of your organization, of your family, or yourself, or even a nation. It's amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out our next episode here and use the comments to ask any questions or suggest any future topics. If this episode was helpful to you and you want to support our mission to improve U.S. healthcare and win the war on complex illness, you can donate any amount using the following QR code or the link in the description. As always, like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who would benefit from it. See you next time.